Hi, it's Valentine's Day, and what better way to celebrate than talking about love stories? Back in college, I had a column on her campus where I talked about reading, and one of the columns I wrote was about what makes a good love story. It's been about 4 years since I published that now, and my opinion has evolved a little bit. So let's talk about it. What makes a good love story? What criteria makes a story a love story, and what makes a love story a good one? There's a few criteria I want to address in this video. But I just want to note first that this is entirely my opinion and this is not backed by any kind of academic research. We've seen stories where love lasts a lifetime, sometimes lasting multiple lifetimes. And in some cases, a character would rather die than be without their love, and sometimes love just straight up brings you back to life. In all of these stories about the power of love and the importance of devotion, there are some implicit assumptions that we need to unpack. There is the assumption that you have to be inseparable to be in love. You have to always want to be around your partner. Sometimes it's that the person will change for you or give things up for you. Sometimes it's that they'll stick with you through the worst circumstances, even if your partner is creating those circumstances. There's also an assumption that they're willing to fight for you and maybe even hurt other people for you. Sometimes they might even help you hide a body. And of course, I'm talking about romance here, but I think these assumptions apply to both familiar relationships and friendships as well. Romance in particular is associated with grand gestures, so these tropes tend to be more common in romantic stories. And being really committed to someone is seen as a sign of love, even when you're like, why are you even spending any time with this person? And one short story that I often go back to when talking about love stories is By Love Possessed by Lorna Goodison. It's about a woman who's invested a significant amount of time into collecting decorative plates. And she's also in a relationship with this person who does not seem very fond of her. And at the end of the story, her partner basically destroys all of her decorative plates that she's collected over the years while she just stands and watches. And this is someone who she's supposed to love, who's supposed to love her. And this person damaged something that was really valuable to them. And I kind of see that as like the price of devotion, being so committed to someone even when they don't value the things that you value. And that kind of brings me to my next point, which is that reciprocity is really important in love stories. It can't just be one person in love, one person suffering, one person just terrorizing the other. They have to match each other's freak. Let's say they do match each other's freak. They both love each other. Does the presence of love make a love story? I don't think so. And I think that would be kind of obvious to most people, actually. Two characters in a story could be in a relationship and the relationship not be the main focus of the story, therefore not making a love story. But even if we see a romantic relationship develop during the story, I don't think it really counts as a love story. At least I don't believe it counts automatically. Now, by this point, you're probably asking yourself, aren't you just describing romance? No. Conventional standards about romance are that a romance is a story that's primarily about a romantic relationship. But I think a romantic relationship can be the primary relationship in a story, and it could be used to like make a point or develop the characters, but it could still not be a love story. I recently reread the Hunger Games trilogy in preparation for Sunrise on the Reaping coming out next month. And it got me thinking about how when the movies first came out 10 or so years ago, people were not happy about the focus on Team Gale versus Team Peeta because their belief was that the romantic plot lines were not the main focus of the story and should not be getting as much airtime in the media. And I agree. I don't think that the romance was the main purpose of the Hunger Games. I don't think the Hunger Games is a love story. The romance was meant to represent a choice that Katniss had to make. However, when you compare that to The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is the prequel, the relationship between President Snow, or Coriolanus Snow, and Lucy Gray Baird, their romantic relationship was the primary relationship in the novel. And I remember that there were a lot of concerns about that plot line when it was first announced because people were worried that having a romance between Snow and Lucy Gray, who was from District 12, would end up like cheapening the things Snow had done in the original trilogy, or it create some kind of Freudian excuse for him, or otherwise give him a sort of humanity that people didn't feel he deserved, essentially. Basically, a lot of concerns about the supposed love story between them. But eventually, when the book came out and it became clear that Snow didn't even view Lucy Gray as a person, I think a lot of those concerns went away. But again, I bring that up to show that even when you have a romantic relationship as the primary relationship in a story, that doesn't necessarily make it a love story, especially if the characters involved don't actually love each other for who they are. But by this point, you're probably like, but wait, before you were talking about romance. The Hunger Games is not a romance series. And I agree. But that leads me to my next question, which is, does something have to be a romance for it to be a love story? I don't think so. One of my favorite shows is Hannibal. And I can already hear my friends going like, oh, here she goes. But listen, I have a point. The entire show revolves around the relationship between Hannibal Lecter and the FBI agent protagonist. The trajectory of their relationship throughout the show goes from friends when they first meet, to enemies when the protagonist finds out that Hannibal is a serial killer, to lovers when the protagonist realizes, actually, I'm kind of into that. The problem, or at least to me it's a problem, the problem is that in the 10 years since the show has ended, the reputation of the lover's arc has preceded the rest of the show. So now, I've seen on social media, the show is being recommended to people as a romance. It's being recommended to people for the relationship. And now people are going in with like shipping goggles, and then they quit halfway through season 1 because they're like, I came for a romance and I don't see it. Mind you, the romance doesn't happen until season 3. I love the show. I joke about it being a rom-com, but I would never actually recommend it to someone as a romance. The reason I'm even bringing it up in this video, despite the show not being a romance, is that I would still probably call it a love story, because their relationship is kind of the point of the show, even though it's not the entire point. I think the relationship really kind of drives what goes on around them, and the show is ultimately about how both of them change as a result of that relationship. And I really think that that applies to any book or movie or TV show where the relationship really drives the plot, not just media that's classified as romance. On that note, I think love stories are really about humanity, who people are inside and who they are outside of their relationships. I don't think a love story necessarily needs to have a quote-unquote happy ending. I think the characters need to find satisfaction in some way, but that doesn't necessarily need to be with each other. Because if you look at something like A Walk to Remember, the couple is not together at the end because one of them has passed away, but the other remaining partner has found satisfaction with his life as a result of their relationship. I think that counts for something. I also think that's why a lot of toxic relationships tend to appeal to people in fiction, because even if you would never want to experience any of those things in real life, they at least seem satisfied with each other. I think it also goes back to what I said earlier about devotion involving sticking with someone even through the worst circumstances. And in a lot of relationships, I think people truly want to be with someone who sees them at their worst and chooses to stick around. To sum up, love stories involve devotion, reciprocity, and ultimately being satisfied with the choices that you've made. And of course, not all love stories are inherently romances, and they can be found in the most unexpected places.